The sexual act is possibly the most potent and pleasurable gateway to the primordial and the divine. From the tantric mysteries of Hinduism and Buddhism and the inner alchemy of Taoism to the sacrament of the bridal chamber in Christianity, and of course the traditions of Western magic and witchcraft, sex pervades the highest and most secret teachings all over the world. Tonight, Jason Miller joins me. His new book, Sex, Sorcery, and Spirit, draws upon his training in Eastern and Western mystery schools to produce a frank, comprehensive exploration of sexual sorcery and spirituality. We're going to be talking all of that tonight. Thank you so much for joining me. Sit down, get comfortable. It's going to be an interesting show, to say the least. If you have questions or if you're listening and you want to make a comment or ask for some clarification, we are live tonight. You can call in and speak to us on the air, or you can send me an in-quick message right here on achieveradio.com. So without further ado, thank you, Jason, for joining me. Welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So this topic is a wonderful, refreshing review of something that we don't find too often in spiritual topics. In fact, the word sorcery is even considered to some to be, a manipulative type of energy. So I'm really excited. I have a lot of questions for you tonight, and so I've read most of your book. It's very fascinating. I really have enjoyed it so far. So I'm curious where you would start with an audience who may not be aware of, necessarily the topic we're taking on tonight.
Well, I would say that the best place to think of it is maybe as a yoga. Everyone is familiar with yoga. So, if you're not interested in thinking of things as magic or witchcraft, etc., and these are really terms that get thrown around usually for whatever the other people are doing. That may be the same as whatever you're doing, but if it's the religion or the camp that you're not of, then it gets considered sort of magic and sorcery. But if we think of yoga as a way of experiencing enlightenment, a way of self-transformation, then that's really what the heart of this book is about. It's about using sex, the moment of orgasm, the energy of the sex act, as fuel for self-transformation, and also for making changes in the outer world. And this is an old practice that has roots in Buddhism and Taoism and in the West in alchemy and even in esoteric Christianity, as you mentioned at the intro, but is also something that is accessible to anyone outside of those traditions. So it's something you do, not something you believe, and it's accessible to anyone.
Well, we all come from the energy of it. We're all conceived in the act. So it makes sense to me that it's part of our vitality and how we would interact with others. The sexuality part of spirituality is oftentimes shunned and considered a lower energy or something that they need to get rid of in order to achieve enlightenment. What do you say to that?
To the idea that sex is something that needs to be shunned in order to achieve enlightenment, I'm not sure I heard the question completely.
Well, I'm just wondering what you would say. I mean, do you get approached with that type of attitude a lot in this work when you teach this material?
Yes.
Or have you come across that? Okay, and so when you do come across that, what do you say to those people who suggest that?
Well, I think that renunciation is a valid path as well. The issue is realizing that there are multiple paths to the same goal. So a great example of this is from one of my teacher's teachers, Dudjom Rinpoche, from Tibet. And he was explaining the difference between the sutrayana that we all think of as Buddhism, become a monk, shave your head, no sex, no lying, fighting, and anger or fun. And then the path of the tantrika, one who is using sex on the path and is sometimes even using drinking and things like that on the path. So the example is that of a poisonous plant in the yard. If you can imagine a poisonous plant, the monks are gathered around it, telling everyone, stay away, this is a poisonous plant, renounce the poisonous plant, and tell others not to go near the poisonous plant as well. And this is sort of the sutrayana of Buddhism. Whereas the tantrayana are the alchemists. They say, we can use this plant to make an antidote for the poison, similar to the way that every vaccine contains a seed of the disease that it vaccinates against. So we can alchemically transform this and use it as fuel for enlightenment, because the passions are fuel. The passions are energy. And if we can strip it from having this hold over us, over this attachment, then that becomes an amazing energetic force for attaining realization. So it's one of those things where I tell people you need to deal with it one way or the other. So if people are telling me that they believe that sex magic and sex alchemy is something that needs to be renounced in order to advance, then I have to ask them, are you celibate? Are you practicing this, or are you just preaching this and living a normal life like everyone else? If so, then I would say that the person that is willfully and spiritually consciously approaching sex has a better grasp on its effect on their spiritual, emotional life than somebody who's just sort of, doing whatever they do. So it's certainly no more harmful than a normal person's sex life. Let's put it that way.
We'll get into that later. So you have a fascinating background in history and how you came to be a person who talks and teaches this. Can you share with us some of your background and where you came from and how this became part of what you do now?
Sure. Well, my earliest experiences that sort of gave shape to my interest were at a very young age. I had some psychic experiences that I think a lot of kids have. You have these moments where it almost feels like you're in a play and that there's stuff going on behind the curtain. And you catch little glimpses of it. But I was never able to sort of get rid of that thought. It always seemed to me like there was more going on. And so I had these experiences fairly regularly until I was like 6 or 7, and then they subsided. But then they sort of awoke again in my teens, and I had the amazing fortune to run into several teachers that were willing to mentor me and guide me. This includes a teacher at my high school who was involved in Rosicrucianism and ceremonial magic. It involves a conjure doctor who ran a little shop in a town near us called Lakewood, and eventually I was to run into a lama, one of the first Westerners ordained as a Ngakpa, a tantric lama named John Reynolds. And so, they sort of gave me my start in following all these esoteric paths, and eventually I joined various magical orders and studied under various people and then got very serious and moved overseas and, studied Tantra in Nepal, studied alchemy and witchcraft in Europe, and, took the show on the road and finally developed a teaching of my own.
And so the sexual part of it, did it come out of, a natural gravitation towards your own abilities in that realm? I mean, what was your first experience like, if you don't mind, sharing some parts of that?
My own abilities in the sexual realm. Who doesn't want to brag about that? But no. It was always there. It was always part of what I was looking into, whether it was in the East or the West. So because I had gotten sort of an early start with people there to help, it's not like I was inducted into some kind of secret cult or given an initiation, but I had people there, older people, that were helping guide me towards good books, away from bad books, putting things into a little bit of a real-world context for me, and there to kind of slap me upside the head when imagination would run away with me. But, so I was actually aware of sex magic practices, sex as a spiritual tool, before I had ever even had sex. So I had gotten my start fairly early, and some magnificent experiences. It is, the sex act is a primordial experience. It is this ego-shattering moment, if you're doing it right, I guess, that the French call le petit mort, the little death. The ego just falls away, and you're left in this sort of spiritually, not just physically, naked state, laid bare. And it is from this state that you can grasp in the nature of enlightenment. So I had been practicing it right from the get-go, and I pursued it through Western orders like the Ordo Templi Orientis, as well as Eastern orders like the Tibetan Nyingmapa. So,
and
always,
so I must ask.
It's never been the whole of my path, but it's always been there as part of it.
Yeah, of course. And, it's interesting because when I was reviewing your material to have you come on the air, I was really impressed with the fact that you were so willing to talk about it because, you just have a really down-to-earth way of describing what you're teaching and the different aspects. And that's what makes your book very accessible to people, I believe. If they have had experiences with partners, perhaps that they can't explain, or it's been very spiritual, there's not a lot of places, at least I don't think really, that you can go to really find information. It's kind of like this weird thing, well, wow, that happened, and so what do I do with that? And, and then you get into the realm of where partners don't really know what to do with these high-level spiritual experiences if they're not actively practicing a craft, but they just happen to have these experiences. You call it twin flame, soul connection, whatever you want to label it. There's a lot of anxiety, I think, about how to handle those kinds of experiences appropriately. And so this kind of handbook that you've written is a good field guide of sorts to really put that into some perspective for people, even if they're not looking to actively do it as a spiritual practice. There's no real question there, but it's just more commentary. And what are some of the things that came up for me personally as I was reading the book or going through it, getting ready for our show. So when people come to you, do they seek answers in how to deal with these kinds of spontaneous happenings that they don't really know what to do with? Have you had a lot of experience with that coming to the table for you from people who are, kind of looking for answers in that aspect, not necessarily to train or take it to the level that you've taken it to, but for, oh my God, I experienced this when I had sex with this person, and what do I do with that kind of thing?
Every now and then I run into somebody who comes at it from that end. One of the interesting things about the last 10 years or so is the emergence of the sort of paranormal movement, the ghost hunters and parapsychology shows and things like this. And there's no shortage of paranormal societies. I mean, I live in southern New Jersey, and I think we have 3 of them, in rural South Jersey that people contact for that, for weird experience kind of things. Most of the people that I interact with come to me with an interest in magic and in training, or have some idea already that of what they're looking for in that regard. But I have, spoken with a few people that have had these sort of earth-shattering, ego-shattering experiences during sex, and it's not that they necessarily thought to seek somebody out to talk about them, but when they run across me, then they get to talking, and then I'm sort of able to put some of that in context for them. So it is gratifying. And there are parts of the book that are not necessarily praxis-oriented, but are sort of just reporting on things that have happened as well. So, there are examples in the book of things that I don't necessarily do, but have happened to people. So some of that is there for them.
Yeah, it just seems like we're in such a precarious place on this planet. We have so much going on, and so people have never been under this much stress in their life. And their relationship with sexual activities can be anywhere from perfectly healthy and balanced to completely dysfunctional. And there's such a wide array of attitudes and stuff towards sexuality. People have all kinds of all over the spectrum type opinions on it. Do you see us evolving as a humanity, as a species, in the general direction of higher spiritual sexuality? I hope.
I do. I do. I mean, I see, it's not that I don't see unhealthy patterns emerging, but overall, I see things moving in a good direction. So, for me, I tend to be a liberal-minded person, obviously, for writing a book like this. So, I am excited to be living in a world where, people of my generation think it's perfectly normal for people to be gay and transgendered and things like that. And hopefully my children's generation will look back and just wondered how people could have ever seen it any other way. So I think that's very healthy. I think that open talk about sex is very healthy. I mean, this is now, people in their 20s and 30s gathering around the table with friends very often will talk about, very frankly and openly about their sexual partners and things that go on. And I think that's very healthy. There's a lot that's unhealthy going on. I think that, the Internet, for as much as it is good for bringing people together, it can also alienate. So you have a lot of people turning towards, false gratification, which actually diminishes their libido and things like that. So that's not good. But overall, I think things are headed in a positive, more evolved direction, and I hope they continue to do so.
Yeah,
I mean, I would
well.
not have been able to write this book 100 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting topic for sure. And like I said, I'm glad that you've brought it up. So let's talk some specifics. I have a question that came up while I was reading your book. I want to know what your thoughts are on a child conceived during orgasm versus a child conceived not during orgasm, if you think or feel or have any understanding of what that may or may not be. Anything to that or no? I would think so. A child conceived in orgasm, like the moment of conception, if you have that in orgasmic energy versus just procreational type, get it over with kind of thing, how that would actually affect the energy of the child.
Right. Yeah, I haven't studied it in depth. I have twins of my own and can happily report that, that was conceived during mutual climax, so that was good. But I would hesitate to weigh in on that. I'm a person who has a pretty balanced view of nature versus nurture. So I think I don't know how much impact it has on that child's makeup, ability, or future. I would be hesitant to weigh in on something like that. I would leave that up to the biologist.
I was curious if you had any, just off the hook type of, intuitive response to that, considering your training and what you've been working with for so long. So you have twins, twin boys or twin girls?
One of each, match set.
Oh, interesting. Wow. Congratulations on that. That's a big accomplishment to raise twins. So as a parent, how has this work affected, some say that when we get married and have kids, our sexuality goes to the curb and just, sits there until date night somewhere down the road, versus when we're not married and we're in, we're not in that parental role. What can you suggest to people who are perhaps trying to make that more intimate, more connected way of space between them when they are parents? I mean, what advice would you give to people who are listening who are perhaps in that situation?
Well, relationships of any kind, serious relationships, take work. And I don't think that's news to anyone that has been with a partner for, say, more than a year or so. They take work, they take effort. And the more factors you have going on in life in general, the more work you have to put in to keep your partnership front and center. People can get distracted by long hours at work. They can get distracted by important hobbies and passions, including studying magic, and things like that. And children, of course, represent what must be one of the largest distractions that anyone can face as far as their sex lives, because it's something that you can't even discuss in front of them directly. So it is by necessity set to the side to some degree, which means that you have to make special time for it. You have to schedule it. You have to take charge of your time and realize that you and your partner have a life that you have to maintain, the happiness that has to be maintained for yourself in order to reflect back upon your children. So you have to have that aspect fulfilled, but it won't necessarily be as it was in those first few months when you were 22.
Right. When you talk about magic, let's go into that. When you talk about magic, what are you referring to? When people hear magic, there's a wide variety of thoughts on what that means. But in your work, when you approach the word or act of, what exactly, can you define that for us?
Yeah, sure. Magic is essentially causing change either in yourself or in the outside world using methods that are not generally.
So this is a pretty wide topic. As you can see, Jason's been talking about it from his perspective, in the sense of having a kind of ritual to it, having some purpose to it, trying to gain something from the energy of it, whether, and we're going to try to talk more about that when we get him back on the air. So, the reason I wanted to bring him on the air tonight to talk about this was because somebody had mentioned, we had a fantastic conversation about this recently, about how twin flames, twin souls, people who feel that they have a soulmate connection have this incredible... Hi, Hi, Jason. I was just going on and on while we were waiting to get you back on the line. But what I was talking about to the listeners as we were trying to get you back on was the reason I had brought up this topic for this show. And that had to do with a recent conversation with a friend of mine that we got into, and we were discussing, the soulmate connection, the twin flame connection, and how people really have reported, at least, or what they're willing to talk about, these phenomenal sexual experiences with their twin flames, and how that does breed a kind of out-of-body experience. And I wanted to get into the second half of the show anyway with you, talking about some more specifics and what the outer, inner, the etheric body, how we have these out-of-body experiences, what the purposes of them, what can we do, what's the potential behind that. So I would love to start kind of going into that, because that's what really brought up the topic, to the intention to have you on tonight to talk about this subject. So where do we start when we go another level deeper? We've kind of covered the cultural and, the perspectives and different comfort zones, but let's get right into the good stuff, where we start to talk about what are we really experiencing when we have these kinds of high-level, high-magic sexual experiences.
Absolutely. What you're experiencing is a mystical experience. I mean, this is a Gnostic state where the ego falls away and you experience a certain level of mental, emotional, spiritual freedom. And there are, the magic part of it, the tech part of it, is all about taking that experience, opening it up, making it longer, deeper, etc., and steering it to be used in a useful way rather than just sort of sitting back. So in the sense of out-of-body experiences, a lot of people have reported this, and what happens essentially is that your astral body separates from your etheric and physical body. You can, when you want to think of the difference between the three, I mean, the physical body obviously is your physical body of bones and muscle, and the astral body can move freely and is very malleable in form and moves at will rather than muscle. The etheric body is sort of in between the two. That's the body that's not really perceptible by science, yet you need to move things in it using breath and muscles and willpower as well. It's the etheric body that acupuncturists work on, and other energy healers that deal with channels and nadis and so on, and meridians work on. But the orgasm, because it is this ego-shattering experience, is one of the gateways into astral travel, especially if someone is naturally gifted towards this. They might find themselves floating out of their body or having something similar to a near-death experience. Again, there's that idea of the orgasm as le petit mort, the little death. Now, from this state, you can sometimes experience spiritual contact and learn things. There are ways that you can hold on to this experience and actually travel and make visitations upon other people. And sort of the sky's the limit as far as that goes. There are rituals in the book, for instance, for contacting spirits and then using the moment of sex as a way to facilitate astral seeing and so on.
So that's what you mean by, purpose, right? We're going into this work to ultimately have that experience, yes?
Well, that would be one of the experiences that you could have. It's not just all about astral projection. A lot of it is, the best and most fundamental experience is actually the experience of your genuine awareness without being anchored into the cause and effect of everyday life, the pitter-patter of the monkey mind that keeps us busy and distracted all day. You can, meditate to achieve this, and I'm a big proponent of meditation for people. But if you can utilize sex on this path, then that brings you to Buddhahood, brings you to enlightenment. This is, the story behind why the tantras were taught in this way. So that would be sort of the ultimate experience. Then other experiences that you can have through sex magic are increased vital energy by reabsorbing sexual energy and circulating it and combining male and female energies to balance out each other. Men especially lose not just fluid during sex, but energy during sex. We don't reabsorb it very easily, but there are methods for doing that. And then, yes, you can have these methods of spiritual contact and things like that. And there are ways to deepen that and take it further.
Now, in the world today, we have a lot of different kind of relationships. You talk in your book about, no matter what your sexual preference is, to oftentimes use the visualization of a man and a woman, regardless of what your orientation is. Why is that important?
No, not. There might have been one operation where I talked about that, but I actually think it's pretty important, for people to work within their orientation for most things. People can, if they feel compelled, if one person feels like they want to and have the ability to run, for lack of a better word, feminine energy or lunar energy, if you want to bring it into solar-lunar terminology, then that's great. But I am not a proponent of for instance, gay men visualizing themselves as a heterosexual couple. At all, unless they want to do so. In the book, I tried to make very clear that there are techniques that can be used by anyone of any orientation. There are some techniques that require the fluids, let's say, so the plumbing matters. And then there are some techniques where you can, visualize yourself as a god or a goddess or something like this and take on whatever role you want. But I did what I could to sort of make those distinctions clear as far as the technical end of it, and then to give sort of pointers for where people can learn more, but I didn't want to get into talking about how gay or lesbian people should have sex or should perform sex magic, because that just seemed like it would be arrogant on my part, not being gay, lesbian, or transgendered, to try to tell people how to have sex or how to perform sacred sex in that way. So I don't weigh in on what they should or shouldn't do at all in the book.
Yeah, there was one meditation where you had mentioned, I believe it was in the beginning, I don't have the name of it right here, but you had talked about a beautiful visualization of imagining a couple above you, and above that the angelic realm, and then below you the darker underworld realm. And you had talked about, I think maybe that was the only one that I actually had seen it, but it was a fascinating imagery, because in that particular meditation you did say, whatever your orientation is, just imagine the couple above you being a man and a woman.
Okay, right. There because you're visualizing a specific spirit. It's not, you're not visualizing yourself as having sex in a certain way. You're visualizing male-female in terms of their fluids combining, and then that nectar flows down into you and purifies the channels. This is taken from a meditation on Vajrasattva, basically, where the male-female combine and create the elixir, or the amrita in tantric terms, the medicine that purifies the body. But that's a visualization for outside of you, not for you to actually have sex and visualize your partner in that way.
Yeah, and you had mentioned something about the polarities necessary or something along those lines for that particular one. So let's, talk about that. So what kind of energy, is there different energy created when you have a heterosexual experience versus a homosexual experience? What kind of energetic differences, besides what's obvious, are we dealing with when you work within this realm?
Well, again, I feel a little, I don't want to say, I can certainly say what kind of experiences you're having with heterosexual sex, and I have, talked to people in the course of researching the book that are other orientations and discuss the matter. And what I believe is this, that there are certain things that the orientation does not affect the result at all. So, for instance, meditating on the moment of orgasm. An orgasm is an orgasm is an orgasm, and I don't think it really matters whether it's opposites or the same sex or anything like that. Then there are energetic practices that are said to require the male and female energies. But in this case, I don't necessarily see those being totally anchored. We all have male and female energies within us, and in fact, this is taught in the Tantras and in Taoism and so on. So it would certainly be possible for a homosexual couple to have one person sort of generate that lunar energy and one person generate that solar energy, or that feminine and that masculine energy, however they want to see it. Or maybe they don't view that polarity in those terms at all. They see it as alchemical, as positive and negative, or receptive and sending. So that is something where, again, I don't think that the orientation matters. And then there are rites where you're actually working with the physical fluids. So what your physical gender is certainly matters. That said, there are rites that are specific to homosexual people, and there are rites that are specific to heterosexual people. And each of those are special and useful in their own way. And some people, for instance, the famous and some would say notorious occultist Aleister Crowley was fond of using both of those on his path. And found them both to be important, each in their own right. So it's not a matter of this being the ultimate way, and then other things being perversions of that or something like that. That's not the case at all. So I would say that it's not that it doesn't matter. It's not so loose that it's just like, oh, it's all just in your head, none of it matters, because that doesn't really pay respect to the differences that people have. But it matters, but it's not a matter of being ultimately correct or more natural or anything like that.
Interesting. We have a question that's been submitted from Chris. He asks, is the female G-spot orgasm more directly associated with the transmutation of energy? That's his question.
Is the female G-spot orgasm more directly related
associated with the transmutation of energy?
I would say that it's not more or less associated with the transmutation of energy than another type of orgasm. I would say that in comparison to the male orgasm, it is easier to work with. One of the things that I point to in the book is that so much of the teaching in both the East and the West has been geared towards men, as far as what needs to be done and so on. But it's part of that is, of course, just simple patriarchy and general ignorance about female sexuality that persists, unfortunately, to this day, even in scientific circles. But it is also the fact that just men need more help because we climax faster, we lose fluid, we lose libido once we climax, typically, and we just need a little more help. So it ultimately you want to have partners orgasming at the same time and transmuting that energy. But I wouldn't say that the female G-spot is more associated with it. It's just easier to work with.
Why do you think there's been such a history of erasing the woman's sexuality and power out of the public knowledge?
Well, there's a number of things. I mean, there is simply people in control are always afraid of losing control. And, men have been in control for a long time and are always afraid of losing that control, losing that ground. And good Lord, look at the resistance that there is to just consent laws and things like that. It's as if men are still asserting a right to just rape and things like that in some cases. So we have not, unfortunately, come very far. In the scientific world, in researching this book, the research on female sexuality is shockingly lacking in comparison to male sexuality. Because, again, there are more men in controlling the purse strings of the science field. So, it was not that long ago that we didn't really have a clear idea of what the clitoris was or if it has any purpose or what female sexual fluid is actually made of. We still, there are still papers that don't agree. So that was a fun research time. So, yeah, it's about fear and control and fear of what we don't understand. There is power for the female in sex, and, men have feared that. And to a certain extent, women are the gatekeepers of that.
Why do you think, why have they feared it? Why? I mean, is there some place in history that you could see that might have particularly, documented that as far as women being really wiped out of not only the religious realms within the world, but also the sexual realms within the world? And we can find that in all major religions across the board, pretty much. I mean, it's mostly male dominated, and the female is oftentimes either just outright forgotten and left out of that, or even, kind of demonized.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and I could not point to one instance, like one 0-point origin for it. probably in prehistory. You have to think about how tenuous survival was back in the olden days, and men controlled things essentially because we have 30% more body mass than the ladies do, and thus are more able to be physically brutal in terms of survival, protecting people, and things that are not as important in today's society as they once were, but at one time were the only thing between life and death. So that put men in charge. And women, what little power they had was often found in the bedroom, and through sort of, the arts of enchantment and bewitching and so on. And this is where you get the stories of these, I tend to think of them as assertive and powerful women, but history remembers them as sort of manipulative, women who spun men around. Everyone, this is old witchcraft. This is Medea. This is Sheba, and so on. So, there's no one source, but you get no argument from me that it has been the case.
Yeah, it has. It has definitely, if you look through. Now, Chris has sent us another question through the Inquick. He asks if, Jason, you could comment on the Gnostic concepts of orgasm as original sin.
Well, the Gnostics didn't necessarily conceive of orgasm as original sin. And whenever we're talking about the Gnostics, we have to be careful as to who we're talking about. But, the Gnostics believed that the world was created by a demiurge, and that Christ was here to sort of rescue us from this world and bring us into true knowledge of the fullness, the pleroma. So it's a very different form of Christianity than what we have today. But the idea of original sin really comes from Constantine more than anything else. And, again, it's a way of, if you're suggesting people need salvation, you need to tell them what they need salvation from. And sex,
isn't that something? I have to stop you there for a second, because you just hit it right on the head for me. People need something to be saved from. I just know how to say something about that, because I've been doing some writing and research on some other things associated with that, and it's true. We need something to be saved from. It feels like we need that, and I don't understand why. Why do we need to be saved from anything? We're already perfect as we are, I believe. Anyway, sorry, I needed to throw that in there.
Well, I think there's
you off too much, Jason. Sorry.
No. And I don't know. I agree and disagree. I think we all have this internal perfection, but it's like the perfection of the clear sky. We get clouds, but the sky is still there. It's still fundamentally, at its base, clear, even when it's a cloudy day. The sun is still up there in the sky, but it gets blocked by clouds, and so our minds do attach to things in unhealthy ways. So in that sense, I think people naturally feel that they're imperfect, and that they do feel this sort of Pascal God-shaped hole in their lives. What exactly they need, though, and tying that to the orgasm and to being born and the original sin of disobedience in Eden, that is Well, that's for people to weed out the theology, but I certainly don't buy into it, and I think increasingly people are buying into it less and less.
Yeah, the concept that you were talking about just a few minutes ago about original sin. I mean, there are so many people who are just told that sex is a sin and you were born in it and you need to spend the rest of your life feeling sorry about that and making it right. And if we weren't given that kind of programming, I wonder what kind of species we would really be and how that energy produced would be affecting the world differently.
Well, I try not to blame any individual religion too much. I blame people. If religion wasn't here, people would find another tool to get each other down. In Buddhism, sex is not seen as any better, really, and that's another major religion. It's not seen as original sin, but it's seen as a passion that keeps you from Buddhahood, unless you're a tantrika. And even then, in Tibet, it's a lot of people stress visualizing consorts for Tantra. There's no shortage of monks. Tantra is not seen as something that's suitable for everyone. Whereas in this day and age, I think most of that has been kicked to the curb, even by religious people. So you now have, Christian dating networks and I mean, good Lord, there are Christian, BDSM networks for people to have healthy sex lives and so on. So I think even within the religions, the attitude towards sex is becoming much healthier and much more open. So,
good. It should. We're ready. I feel that it's happening, and whether we can blame that on the internet or access to information or whatever. Humanity, it's like the 100 monkey syndrome. One person gets it, it starts to kind of spread out, and other people feel the call, whether they, know what they're doing or not. There's still some element of that kind of consciousness infection, if you will, that spreads. That some people maintain that level of consciousness, and so it makes it accessible. They're pathway makers. We're at the end of our show, and I just wanted to give you a chance to tell everybody where they can find you online if you do sessions or offer your services. And I also wanted to mention that in the book you do talk about some of the dangers of sexual magic and the importance of keeping your integrity intact. And I really appreciate that as well. So where can people find you? How can they work with you? What kind of offerings do you give people?
Sure. I have a blog called Strategic Sorcery, and I have a website which is at strategicsorcery.net. But if you Google Strategic Sorcery, you'll find me. And I have an online course that's a year-long course in practical magic. Some of it is about sex, but not much of it, actually. Only one lesson is about sex magic. I do work by consultation as well. I give private teachings to people, and also do readings and so on for people. You can find all that on that site as well. And, of course, I have this book and my other books, Financial Sorcery, The Sorcerer's Secrets and Protection and Reversal Magic. And those you can find, at any good bookstore. So, that's how to find me. Just Google Strategic Sorcery, and I'll pop right up on your computer screen.
Well, Jason, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure. Your book is awesome. Highly recommended to everybody listening. His link is on my radio homepage. If you need it, you can find it and find your way to Jason. Jason, thanks.
Thank you so much. It was a great time.